and welcome back to the Red Barrels podcast. It's episode 18. That's the episode we're on. We're legally allowed to drink alcohol.
Apart from in the United States.
Well, we could have sex 2 episodes ago. Now we can appear in pornography. So it's good news. It's good news for everyone because it all works by episodes. I think that's how the law works, right? Maybe people can write into it with a better legal mind, can write in and correct me on that, but we'll find out.
What a horrifying spin-off you're implying. I'm so sorry, dear listener.
As you just heard him, I'm not alone. It's who's with me.
Hi, it's Ed. Thanks for listening in again, everyone.
Hello.
Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for joining us, as always. Unfortunately, there is someone who is not here, as always, and that person is Sofie. I feel I kind of took on a maudlin turn as if she's dead or something. She isn't. She's alive. Unless there's been some more, her illness, which is the reason she's not here, it's got a lot worse and we've not been told, and I'm going to have to do some very heavy editing before this episode is published. Hopefully that's not happened. I'm sure it hasn't. I'm sure she's fine. And
I hope you're okay, Sofie.
We wish her well, and we wish the fastest recovery possible. And, I hope she goes past just getting better and just ascends into a higher life form. And, maybe she won't be on the podcast after that either. But it'd be certainly preferable to the other one.
Yeah, she becomes like consciousness at one with the universe. Yeah, that would be incredible.
That'd be fun. I think we'd all enjoy that happening. So let's all hope that happens for Soph. So maybe she's not on the podcast anymore. But all being normal, she should be on the next one. But yeah, that's our intro. Hope you enjoyed that. Because we're going to get straight into it with the games. There's only 2 of us. There's only 2 games we're going to be talking about. And first up, it's going to be my good friend Ed. What have you been playing?
I've been playing Mass Effect 3.
Ooh, controversial.
Yeah. Well, you might remember, long-time listeners may remember that I played Mass Effect 2 on the very first episode of the Red Barrels podcast.
Full circle, baby. Full circle.
Very nearly a year ago now. It was sort of in the 11th month mark, so it's kind of like an anniversary game. So, Mass Effect 3, for those who don't know, is a 2012 action RPG developed by BioWare. It's the 3rd and final entry in the original Mass Effect trilogy, and I played it as part of the 2021 Mass Effect Legendary Edition remaster, which was also done by BioWare. As with the previous games, you play as Captain Shepard, who pilots his or her ship, the Normandy, to various planets across the galaxy and completes story missions on those planets. The story missions are generally pretty story-focused, and the story and the characters is really what the game is about, more so than the gameplay, which is largely a series of shooting segments, followed by some sort of gameplay choice chosen from a dialogue wheel. Throughout the game, you're assessed on whether you choose to be a paragon or a renegade, which are basically, but not exactly, the good versus the bad choice. I say not exactly because even Renegade Shepard is basically a good guy. He's still fighting for the cause of saving the galaxy. He's just doing it in a more blunt, no-nonsense, and sometimes actively kind of cruel way. But he's still basically doing the right overall thing. As I believe I discussed in my Mass Effect 2 Mass Effect 2 podcast.
Not yet.
Episode 1.
You're saved from that, listeners. Don't worry. For now.
I played a Paragon Shepard. And I also played a male Shepard, so I'm just going to be referring to Shepard as he throughout, but you can play as a woman if you'd prefer.
Most people do, apparently. People go on about FemShep. There's a big fan community around the voice actor doing the lady.
That's not true. I believe there is a big community around FemShep, but I believe if you look at the stats, according to an interview I saw with BioWare, very few people, even women, primarily play as the male Shepard.
Oh, really?
I believe that's true. Yeah, it's not just Shepard in the game. As with the previous one, you collect and then continue through the story with a series of sort of side characters known as companions. On any given mission, you can take up to 2 of them with you. So there's always 3 characters in the missions, Shepard plus your 2 side people. The companions control themselves, but if you want to, you can order them to go to specific places and use the powers they have. Although, to be honest, I basically never did that. I just sort of let the AI decide what they should do. Mass Effect 3 continues the story from Mass Effect and Mass Effect 2. One cool thing about this is you can directly import your character from the previous 2 games, and that's what I've done. So my Mass Effect 3 remembers all the big decisions that my Shepard guy made in Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2. It also meant that I started at level 30 in this game. So it didn't reset my progress exactly. It sort of gave me quite a lot of progress, but you can respec your class and all that kind of stuff. I went with a Vanguard for this game. which is what I did 10 years ago when I played Mass Effect 2 for the first time.
10 years ago when you played Mass Effect 2, isn't that when that last year?
I played Mass Effect 2 for the first time
Oh,
10
I
years
see.
ago, and then I replayed Mass Effect 1, Mass Effect 2 last year.
Oh, I
I had
see.
and in preparation for this, if that
Oh, I
makes.
see, I see. So did you play as a Vanguard when you played it, Mass Effect 2 last year?
I can't remember. I basically when I first played Mass Effect 2, I played the like a classic class of you have a big shotgun and you zoom in really quick and
Yeah,
do
yeah.
a lot of damage and then blast them in the face. I didn't do that when I played it last year, but
Mhm.
I'm returning to my roots as a Mass Effect player by doing that again in Mass Effect 3. Speaking of importing the character, I've got a small criticism here straight away, which is because you get so many skill points to start off with, y- the game becomes way easier than it feels like it ought to be. I started with 60 skill points to allocate in this game out of a total of 170. So you're already over a third of the way to maxing your stats right at the start of the game,
Wow.
which definitely had a big impact on the gameplay. It was just so easy, like compared to Mass Effect 1 and 2, which are not particularly difficult games, but they're sort of normal levels of difficulty. In
Mhm.
Mass Effect 3, I died certainly a single digit number of times over the course of my 25 hours of gameplay. Like it was remarkably easy. I'd maxed my entire Shepard character about, I don't know, less than 20 hours in, which
Wow.
meant any of the stuff I got in the last 5+ hours of gameplay was sort of pointless.
Just my own quick history is that I played this game when it came out on the Xbox 360. I
Mhm.
assume you're playing the Legendary Edition, the
Yeah, yeah.
re-release that came out last year, I guess.
2021.
Oh, right. And I don't remember that happening because I also imported my all my character choices and stuff between
Mm.
games. But I said, I mean, maybe it did and I've forgotten. It was a long time ago now. But I definitely don't remember that happening. I don't remember it being a particularly easy game. I don't, at least not easy enough for that to stick in my head. So maybe that's just a legendary edition thing or something. How odd.
Yeah, maybe. It was very, very notable. Like you would
Yeah,
definitely have noted it if you'd had the same experience. I mean, I'm calling it a criticism. I think it is a legit criticism in that it means that the XP you get in the last 5 hours is kind of pointless. In terms of it being too easy, like I could have gone in the settings and turned the difficulty up if I'd wanted. But the
sure.
truth was, like, I did quite enjoy the sort of breezing through the game thing. It's mainly about the story anyway. And
Mm,
as I said a minute ago, my play style, which was zoom up to them with a shotgun, hit them with the thing that sort of knocks them over and then blast them in the face. That is more fun if they die after just a few hits anyway.
sure, sure.
So it felt very fast paced, very arcadey, and was pretty satisfying to play it. So the difficulty itself was not necessarily a problem. I could have turned the difficulty up, but
Hmm.
it was a bit weird that you maxed so early. Although there are still other characters, so they can still level up and all that kind of stuff. But still, that feels like a problem. But back to the story of the game, it continues the story of the galaxy's fight against the Reapers, who are these ancient beings who live somewhere beyond the galaxy, and every 50,000 years or so, they return to harvest the dominant species of the galaxy. As we learn throughout the game, the idea is that history is kind of cyclical and technologically determined, and after 50,000 years, civilization will always have advanced to the stage where they've developed AI that will wipe them all out. So the Reaper, or at least they have a big war with the AI. So the Reapers are basically resetting history every 50,000 years. The previous great civilization that was wiped out was known as the Protheans. Then they've managed to pass on to you various clues and ideas about how you could resist the Reapers. And you build on the information you have from them and from the civilizations before them as well. And also, you form an alliance of alien civilizations to build this secret super weapon, the Crucible. And then while this is being built, your role is to essentially go out and settle disputes before missions for other potential allies to encourage them to commit to your anti-Reaper cause. And without spoiling things, the more of them you get on side, the more resources you acquire, the wider range of options you're going to have at the end of the game, basically, is the sort of idea of it anyway.
Hmm.
So I think it's a pretty solid story. I think Mass Effect's always been a pretty solid story. Like I said, I don't think it's going to, if it was a film, I don't think it was going to win any Oscars. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it's solid. It's fun. It's like a good, like, solid B plus kind of vibe. I think the structure of the game is a bit less solid than Mass Effect 2, which has such a clear structure. In that game, you're fundamentally, the whole story follows you and it's centered on you building out your party. You sort of hear the location of 2 to 3 potential party members. You go and do a mission with them to recruit them, and then later, if you want to, you can go and do a loyalty mission for them, where you get their backstory and you build their relationship. And that was such a solid structure in Mass Effect 2. Not quite the same here. There just isn't such a solid structure as that. You're sort of going from one mission to another, sorting things out, but it doesn't quite feel like it hangs together in such a like direct, engaging way. The first few hours of this game, I would say, felt very intense, very good, very fast paced. I could feel the weight of the 2 games before this, and it really felt like we're reaching the culmination of my time playing Mass Effect. Like, this felt like the start of a big climax.
Yeah.
And this was my first time. As I said, I played Mass Effect 2 ages ago, but then this playthrough is my first time finishing Mass Effect 1 and my first time even touching Mass Effect 3. So it's been a very long time since I first played this series, and it felt like kind of an exciting, kind of a big deal to finally get to this end point, especially because, we've all heard about the end of this game, haven't we? So I was just excited to finally see it.
I will say, back when I played, that was the thing I liked most about it, was that just like incredible novelty of. So for people who don't know, this game, all 3 games came out on the Xbox 360. Maybe they came out on the PS3 as well. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it did.
I think the first one was like published by Microsoft, so maybe not that one, but the later ones were. Anyway, but yeah, it was very much an Xbox 360 kind of famous game, and because all 3 of them were on the system, and they came out however many years apart, it felt like incredibly like epic. That like, oh wow, like in the kind of wider sense, not in the 2000s, 2010s epic bacon sense. But just like this huge thing where all these decisions I made back in Mass Effect 1 actually suddenly are relevant in this game I've played years later. And like finally, oh wow, this thing I chose to do then, this results in this happening. It really felt incredible. That like, there are entire characters. There's a character in this game that could have died. I mean, there's multiple characters that could have died in the first game. And assuming they haven't, there's like a large, a bunch of quests and stuff, and lots of character stuff involving that character, and none of that happens if they died in the first game. Instead, they happen to different characters and stuff. It's just like it really felt kind of incredible that like, oh, everything's kind of working over all these like potentially hundreds of hours of games you've been playing over years.
Yeah, and that still works, I would say, as someone who's just done them all in quite a quick succession last year and this year. It still does feel epic like that. So if you're someone considering playing the series for the first time, I think you still will get that on game 3. So like I said, the start of Mass Effect 3 I felt very intense. I felt the weight that we were just discussing, and it felt quite focused. But then after the first few hours, I felt the pacing slowed down quite a bit, and a lot of options opened up, perhaps to the game's detriment. I think this is because the Legendary Edition of the game that I was playing contains all of the DLC, and it sort of presents a lot of that DLC to you sort of pretty early on in the game.
Yeah.
And while some of that DLC content's pretty good, it all being available at once definitely disrupts the pacing, I think. Obviously, I wasn't looking up for every single mission that I did, whether it was DLC or not. It's not like it's labeled, like it just feels like it's part of the game. But some of the stuff, you can definitely tell it's DLC, especially the really long side stories that have multiple sections and take multiple hours. It's very clear with some parts of it what's DLC or not. So some are pretty good, but even the good ones do kind of undermine the pacing to some extent. For example, I really enjoyed the piece of DLC where there's an attempt on Shepard's life and you've got to fight through the section with minimal weaponry, and as the story goes on, it basically features nearly all of your companions on the Citadel, and you get some cool Citadel lore, and it culminates in this party at Shepard's apartment after you've won. And it felt kind of touching. It felt like a nice send-off to these characters I spent so much time with, I guess especially because it's DLC and it actually came out. Like, people would have been playing that who had already finished the whole game. Like, it felt nice. It felt really good.
Yeah, they basically brought that DLC out as a sort of, well, we'll get into the ending in a minute, but I'm sure, but a sort of apology for the ending, because the ending in its original form at least had very little in the way of like actual kind of closure for most of the characters.
Yeah.
So having the opportunity one last time to hang out with your old pals from these hundreds of hours of video game was basically the point of that. I never played it because I didn't play much of the DLC in this game.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked that bit. I think it was one of the strongest bits,
Yeah,
and
people love it.
but hard to know how to assess it given that it's. I feel like you would definitely have a more negative opinion of Mass Effect 3 if you played it without the DLC. I will talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that later, though. But yeah, like I'm saying, not all the DLC is good as well, in my opinion either. There's a DLC that heavily features Arya, not sure how you say her name, Arya from Mass Effect 2, the ruler of Omega in that game,
Mhm.
and you help her recapture Omega. I think the game expected me to sort of really root for her and think she was cool and like a badass and like also find her kind of charming, but it sort of fell flat for me. I felt like she was kind of a prick and I didn't feel super motivated to reinstall her as the ruler of Omega. She was not a very good person. So, and it was basically that sequence mainly ended up being a long combat section of you
Mm.
retaking Omega. And it was very long. So it was that one especially that I felt really hurt my pacing. I was like quite caught up in the story, and then there's this Omega one. Like, great, I remember that from the last game. This is probably one of the next big bits. And then no, it was just sort of a long thing that didn't really contribute to the story and just ruined my vibe early doors. Uh, Also, it has one of my true bugbears, and I'm sure a lot of you listening will feel the same way, which is that it has some side quests in the DLC but they're only completable when you're doing the DLC. You can't come back later and complete to Omega and complete the side quests,
Mm.
which means that if you don't complete them during that section, they sit in your journal forever, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that was very frustrating. I hate that.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you so much. But to be more positive about the game and the structure of the game, they've structured the story of the game is, like I say, you going and doing random side quests basically to get people to your side, and that makes sense. That avoids the ludonarrative dissonance that a lot of RPGs have of you going to, like, let's say, join the Thieves Guild when the dragons are returning,
Yeah.
or, you know, pissing about playing Gwent when you're meant to be finding Ciri. It takes into account you doing side quests, and all these side quests reward you resources, which ultimately advance you in the main quest. So that was an efficient piece of storytelling, and it was that felt good. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, just the setup of the game at the beginning is that the the Reapers have finally arrived, and they are it opens with an invasion of Earth, and then
Yeah,
they're gonna go for everything else as well, and this is like basically the galactic apocalypse. So
yeah, it's go time, baby.
they really couldn't get away with it. And now you're just gonna do chocobo racing for 17 hours.
Yeah, but they kind of can. The way they structured it, it's like you're
Yeah.
going to go chocobo racing, and as a result of you winning that race, they'll join you
Yeah.
in the intergalactic war.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite good. On the other hand, stepping away from the structure of Mass Effect 2 means spending less time focusing on your companions. Most of your companions are characters who were in the previous games, and it did genuinely feel good to see the companions again. There are also many characters who were companions in the previous games who aren't companions in this game, but who you do get to go and see. And whenever that happened, it was like, oh, it's
Yeah.
Jack from the previous game. Hooray! And Jack specifically being previously, when you first meet her, this like super destructive biotic who's kidnapped as a child and now as a teacher teaching children. It's quite
Yeah.
a nice little
She's
story
got
arc.
hair. She's got hair now, which means she's
Unbelievable.
psychologically healed.
Exactly. Exactly. And the game does also introduce some new companions. And I will say, I think they were basically all pretty underdeveloped, in my opinion. One is the ship's computer, Edie. So she's a new companion, sure, but you have been speaking to her for both the previous games. So she was the least underdeveloped. She sort of cheated by being in the previous two games. The only thing I would say about her is when you see her design, it's hard not to roll your eyes. She's like a sexy robot girl who
Yeah.
looks like she's wearing like very little underwear, and it feels very aimed at 14-year-olds. And
I mean, to be
sometimes you catch yourself playing a game as like a grown adult with a fucking full-time job and stuff, and you're like, this isn't for me. This little bit of design is not for me.
Well,
Go on, what were you saying, Alex?
I think they make a joke about it in the game because it's like
Sure.
produced by the character that Seth Green plays, and he's like, oh
Yeah.
man, it's basically his fantasy. Whereas in the previous game, there was that main woman who is in the white jumpsuit, which was like
Miranda.
unbelievable. Yeah, Miranda, which was unbelievably like clingy, and She's just meant to be a normal woman who's like a high end, special forces operative or something like that.
Yeah.
So at least it makes a bit more sense than Mass Effect 2, I
Yeah, maybe.
think.
The other new companions are there's a big man called James. He's a kind of more muscle than brain kind of guy. Very soldiery, hyper masculine. I basically found him to be pretty boring and occasionally slight sort of cringy. It was just like too much a caricature of big big man, like muscle boy, no brain sort of thing. I didn't love him.
Sure.
The other new character is Yavik, who's a Prothean that you find cryogenically frozen, which is a cool idea for a character. And the actual character is fine. Again, not hugely interesting. He's got this kind of Roman vibe, I would say, like a sort of feeling of like an imperial feeling of superiority because his species was the one that was dominant in the previous cycle, and all the species that are around in this cycle were previously inferior to him, so he sort of looks down on everyone. And we learn that his society was like highly militarized, and again they were like ruled an empire. So he's like just very practiced at dominating his perceived inferiors, which is a good starting point for a character, I thought, but it didn't really go anywhere. And
I
maybe if the
I thought
go
I
on.
quite like that one because the character Liara, her whole thing is that she's been studying the Protheans her whole life and she's dedicated to it. And then she gets to meet one, finds out they're basically massive racist fascists. Like,
Yeah,
it's really
no, I did.
disappointed. That's pretty fun.
I agree. I enjoy him as a plot point. I didn't really enjoy him as a
Yeah,
character. Like he
yeah.
didn't. Nothing really happened with him.
Mm.
There are also a couple of like other
Also,
characters that I'll
I would
mention.
say one of the main reasons that they didn't do that much with him is that he was originally day one DLC. So
I
you had
read that he was DLC, so I was
yeah.
surprised when you knew him. I thought, oh,
No,
okay,
no, it was like
interesting.
literally you had to buy it separately, like immediately after it came out. It was such a bullshit fucking
Oh, not good.
microtransaction
Not
bullshit.
good.
So it meant that he couldn't be that integrated into the plot or anything because
Oh,
he
okay.
couldn't
That's
be
yeah.
like plot important because you might not have him.
Okay, that is interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, you can kind of feel that. Yeah, there are a couple of other characters worth mentioning. We've got a new guy called Cortez who pilots the shuttles to and from the Normandy. The main thing about him that's worth referencing here is that he mentions a couple times his husband. It wasn't made that much of a big deal of that this guy was married to another man. I thought that was nice, like
Mm.
solid, sort of useful character because he flies you about and is like seems like a good guy. And it's sort of casually mentioned that he's LGBT, and I thought that was cool. That was a nice addition to the game. I
Wasn't
appreciated that. It wasn't like they didn't try and. It was just nice. It felt very natural. On the other hand, I didn't so much appreciate the new secondary villain character for the game, whose name is Kai. He worked for the Elusive Man. He's this sort of Chinese assassin guy who turns up with like a sword, a katana, and tries to kill you with high acrobatics. And it's the kind of character, as I said, I'm playing this game, and because of how I'm playing it, it's super easy. You beat him very easily every time, and then he still brags about how he fucked you up, man. And
it?
Shepard's like, "Oh no, not Kai! He's so hard to beat." I was like, "Shepard, 5 seconds ago you pummeled him into the dirt in about 2 seconds," and it's a bit embarrassing. And he feels like he's trying so hard to be cool again with all the flips and the katana, and it just doesn't work, and it's a bit embarrassing. And yeah, that was not a good part of the game. Let's talk about the politics of the game.
Oh,
Um, it's not difficult to work out what the intended political ideals are of the game because the game is very explicit at all times about which one the devs have decided is the morally correct decision.
the
It's the
Paragon.
one that they put at the top right of your conversation wheel
Yeah.
and gets you the Paragon points, exactly. So let's take a look at some of the key conflicts that Shepard is sent in to address, and then we can see what the devs are trying to say about it. I'm sure lots of people have analysed this game far more deeply than I've had time to in my, I've just finished it recently. I've had some time to digest it, but not too much. So if you think I've misunderstood something, Alex, let me know. And if you think I've misunderstood something, dear listener, you can't let me know. But trust me, I completely agree with you and you're 100% right. Please forgive me. So one of the big conflicts across the series is between the Krogans and the Turians and the Solarians. The Krogans are a militaristic species that before the events of the game were sort of raised up by the Solarians, given advanced technology and a new home planet by them, and effectively convinced them to join in a war against a race called the Rachni. the now technologically elevated Krogans rapidly expand their population and sought to conquer more and more planets to house their expanding population. And when they started to take planets that belonged to other advanced species, war broke out between the Krogans and these other Citadel species. These are the Krogan rebellions, and they continued for 300 years before a Solarian bioweapon, the genophage, was deployed by the Turians, which made it so that the vast majority of Krogan pregnancies don't come to term. We already know all that from the previous games, but that's sort of the background setup.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm playing this game, like a little dweeb, I'm thinking, what's this meant to be saying? Like, what's this about? Is this referring to some real life parallel? What's the situation? I don't know what the most direct real life parallel would be to this, but one superpower backing a military force in a war against another superpower, only for, after the war has been won, that now newly stronger military force to come back and bite their previous supporters, then that being followed up by hugely excessive and atrocious violence on the part of the superpower, closely resembles a number of historical events. But the one that springs to mind most obviously, I'm not alone in thinking this, is the United States support for the Mujahideen in the Afghan war against the Soviet Union, out of which Al-Qaeda emerges, who are then in turn responsible for terror attacks against the US, obviously most notably the September 11th World Trade Center attacks, which in turn provided the pretext for the invasion of both Afghanistan in 2001 and Iraq in 2003, which killed close to 1 million people. I'm not saying that this conflict in Mass Effect 3 or across the series is meant to directly be an analogy for this, but I do kind of think that it's probably intended to speak to at least this kind of situation.
Sure.
And I think when the games came out, especially the first couple, it is pretty shortly after the Iraq War kicks off.
Yeah.
I think 2007 is the first one. That's still sort of the main conversation that's happening at that time is the Iraq War. So I do think that this probably is the one that's most likely to be directly actually about a specific event.
Sure. I don't know. My kind of take on it was that it's basically an old trope of science fiction and fantasy where basically they take something that is just objectively awful and bad, i.e., infecting an entire population with a virus that makes them almost entirely infertile.
Yeah.
And then is like worked backwards, like,
How
would you justify that?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, that's an awful thing. But if they hadn't done it, then these aliens in their specifically weird situation would have overrun the world, the galaxy. So maybe in this, let's find a way to make a genocide justifiable. And I mean, you probably could do some thought experiments to work out how you could have a theoretically, morally justifiable genocide. But in reality, then none of them are justifiable. And it's just bizarre theory crafting that just is trying to work. Oh man, putting characters into complex moral scenarios where there is no clear right and wrong because it's very
I agree. It's definitely
arbitrary.
It's definitely part of that. It's definitely part of that sci-fi tradition, and also part of the RPG tradition of you having to make the final choices about how it's going to resolve. I also want to say, having direct parallels in sci-fi or fantasy to specific real life situations can confuse things if you decide that they're too directly lined up. Like, I'm not trying to say it's one for one. I'm just saying there's a parallel, especially when sci-fi or fantasy, when an alien has another species has like a presumably genetic predisposition to certain things. If this had been a direct parallel to the situation I outlined, then an implication could be drawn that the devs are casting, I don't know, the people in the Middle East as inherently militaristic in the way that the Krogans are.
Yeah.
So for the record, I don't think they're doing that, and I think it's better to be a bit vague in the way that they are with their parallels, or else the stories can end up being kind of racist.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I think that parallel is there, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's genuinely entirely unconscious. Just kind of the idea of like, oh, we help out one group and then that backfires on us, militarily. I think that's just like an idea that's in the air.
Yeah, that's very plausible too. I can never say that without interviewing someone from the game. I can never really say one way or the other. But yeah, And ultimately, the Krogans end up working as a stand-in for any hyper-militaristic society, like the Spartans, for example, rather than working as a stand-in for a specific racial or ethnic or national group in real life. And it's definitely better that that's the case.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the right course of action according to the game as it relates to this genophage scenario? So the mission in the game centers around whether or not you should cure the genophage and therefore stop the genocide of the Krogan people. And yeah, it's definitely a genocide, right? There's no question about that.
Mhm.
It meets the definition of the genocide according to the UN in that it's a measure imposed to prevent bursts on a target group. There is some debate online about whether it should count as a genocide or not, and I think it's pretty clear cut what the answer is to that question.
Yeah.
I mean, you can debate even the most obvious genocides being genocides, as we've seen very much in the press for the last 2 years. The game also doesn't shy away from the fact that it's a genocide. It directly uses the word genocide to describe what's happening, which I appreciated. Like, I'm glad that it didn't, throw its fist and hide its hands. Like, it was like, yeah, we are depicting a genocide, and this decision is about a genocide. Make your choice with that in mind. Thank you. The Paragon answer is to release the genophage and stop the genocide. So that's clearly a good take. Don't fucking do genocide, guys. What the fuck? And it's, I would say, not an especially bold take. Again, as I say, that hasn't stopped there being arguments online about it.
Yeah.
Or endless forum posts about what was the right thing to do. Especially once the game correctly acknowledges the genophage to be an act of genocide. It is hard to take any position but condemn it. Once it's used that word, you have to be kind of a dick to, well, yeah. So the implication is it's taking some kind of anti-war stance, I guess, in relation to the wars like Iraq and Afghanistan, which is, of course, a good take. But again, it's vague enough that it's not really directly condemning any specific war, which is how it normally functions in sci-fi or fantasy.
Also, as you said, being a renegade isn't being a bad person, generally. Or at least the game doesn't appear to think that. So I think it definitely considers keeping the genophage to be a legitimate position. It may not think it's the ultimate goody two-shoes thing to do, but it does think maybe, again, very much kind of like War on Terror, kind of like 24, the TV show, hard choices by hard men are what's required now. So we can't have sentiment. We've got to keep this genocide going. We've got no choice. I think that you could also interpret the game as saying that, or at the very least, it's on the fence between those positions.
I think the game is mainly saying the Paragon option is the good guy option, but you can be the guy from 24 if you'd like.
Yeah.
That's how I feel the game is communicating to me, but maybe I'm reading into it. So I do basically take the Paragon choice in any given circumstance to be the dev approved, this is the correct choice, but we are going to let you choose the other one if you want vibe. That's how I read it, but that could be wrong. Actually, speaking of this, I would like to touch on militarism briefly in the game. Of course, it's depicting a war, and you play as a commander in that war. For most of the game, it straightforwardly and unambiguously paints this fictional military as absolute heroes. Of course, the game has come up with a situation where violent military force is required to save the galaxy. So I'm not arguing with that, but it does mean there is a strong pro-military vibe throughout the game. So while it does have that kind of anti-war sentiment, I would say, in quite a few storylines, it is also kind of functioning as a pro-military thing. So that's kind of a strange split, although it is a split you do see quite often in fiction. Like pro-soldier, anti-war is quite a popular take, and I do think it's kind of the take that Mass Effect is ultimately giving you.
And also, as you were saying with as we were saying with the air, the war and terror air in the atmosphere, the idea of like the very kind of lib position of, well, I don't like the war in Iraq, but I support the troops.
Yes,
is I think quite strong in that.
I agree. That was definitely in the zeitgeist, and I definitely think it plays into this game. Let's look at a second clearly political part in the story, which is the Quarian Geth conflict. The Geth are an AI created by the Quarians. Once the Quarians realized the Geth were becoming sentient, the authorities systematically began to hunt down the Geth and terminate them, enforcing martial law and killing even peaceful Geth. This led to a war in which the Quarians basically lost. They were nearly decimated by the Geth. Literally 99% of them die, and they have to flee their home planet. The Geths could have chose to kill the last of them and decided not to, because they couldn't predict what the implications of that would be. The Koreans are forced to become a nomadic people without a homeland, living in the migrant fleet and needing to always wear special spacesuits to survive away from that homeland. As with the Krogan Rebellion, I don't think this is an analogy for any one specific event. To me, the Koreans seem to take various aspects of cultures that have been historically maintained distinct cultural traditions within the West. So the wearing of a full body covering when out in public brings to mind the coverings of various religious faiths, most notably the burqa in Islam. The nomadicism brings to mind various traveler communities. The main Korean we meet is Tali, and the voice actor for Tali says that they're going for an Eastern European accent, so perhaps that calls to mind a Romani accent. And the most pertinent we have for the whole people looking for their lost homeland thing is that probably brings to mind the Jewish people for quite a lot of players. So I think it's important that there's not an exact analogy here, because to the extent that there is an exact analogy, it can be read as like a relatively weak take on Israel-Palestine, I would say. That's what someone playing it today is probably most likely to be thinking of.
Yeah.
You've got a displaced people who managed to keep themselves as a distinct culture over the course of several centuries, who are unable to return to their homeland, and the conflict between them and the people now living in their homeland has had bad actions on both sides. And although I suppose at the end of the day, the Koreans were planning to completely eliminate the Geth, and the Geth deliberately allowed 1% of the Koreans to survive, they're still very both-sized in that situation in a way which is not, it's often presented as by liberals in real life, but is not the case in real life. Ultimately, in the game, the paragon choice is to bring the two sides together. Yeah, I mean, that would be a very misleading characterization of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and obviously the game doesn't say that it is a summary of the Israel-Palestine conflict, so it's not like I can't really beat the game up too bad for that, but it does feel like it's kind of trying to reference that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yes, it's notable that if it is meant to act as kind of a stand-in for that, then they've made the Palestinian stand-ins significantly less sympathetic in their fictional story than they are in real life. For example, they've committed a retaliatory genocide against the stand-in for the Jewish people, which that has not happened in real life, has it? Also, many of the Geth have been brainwashed by the Reapers, and the game gives you a choice between releasing them from their brainwashing or killing them all. If the game is meant to be taking the Geth as like a stand-in for Palestinians, then it's kind of saying that they've been manipulated into violence or something like that. So maybe it's meant to be like an anti-Hamas thing, or an anti-Hezbollah thing, or like an anti-extremist Islam kind of thing. Like, I would be surprised. I think maybe you would disagree, Alex, but I'd be surprised if they weren't conscious of that to some extent when making the game. You seem to think it's more likely to be unconscious. I think that at certain points in the multiple years that they spent making this game, it would have at least occurred to them that that's the kind of thing that they're kind of setting up.
I mean, I'm not saying that it wasn't unconscious, but I just like, especially, back then, Israel-Palestine stuff was so kind of, especially in America, just like, oh, we don't really talk about it. Palestine seems like they're bad. Israel, it should be for Jewish people, etc. They're like that basic position, but it was also just like so utterly enveloped in society that people just didn't really think about it. So I can imagine a situation where they just literally, even if it took them the best part of 10 years to make these 3 games, that they literally just kind of unthinkingly include these tropes without considering the direct implications of them. But I mean, again, I certainly wouldn't say that with any authority. I just think it's a possibility.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I mean, I would say BioWare are Canadian rather than American, so that
Sure.
our views of the Americans doesn't necessarily apply, but it's also not that dissimilar. My understanding is the attitude's quite similar.
Yeah,
I would also say
I mean, I think
in 2010, 2011, there was a quite big surge of violence from Israel against Palestine.
Yeah.
So that kind of was in the sort of media cycle a little bit directly before while this game was being developed.
Yeah.
So that also, I think, makes it more likely that it's a conscious thing.
I just think you're just underestimating the number of people who are just completely turned off from that stuff, especially at this time.
Yeah, you could certainly be right.
And I would say that, like, and while BioWare is in Canada, you know, Canada has and had and maybe still has like very favorable tax regimes for game developers. So they brought people in from all over the world, and especially lots of Americans would have worked on the game. So I wouldn't necessarily
Mhm.
consider the Mass Effect games to be like, a
Canadian culture.
Canadian piece of cultural psychology.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, so if it is meant to be Israel-Palestine, then it's not pro-Israel, but it's certainly not pro-Palestine, and
Yeah,
it's more pro-Israel than pro-Palestine, but it's basically pro-peace.
yeah,
Basically, is the situation. Although, I guess if is it a one state or a two state? Well, it's kind of a one state solution at the end of the game. There, they don't
yeah.
set up separate states, and they
True.
do live together. So
Yeah.
maybe it's more progressive than I'm giving it credit for. The last big sort of ethical, political choice that I have to mention, but I'm not going to go into too much detail on, is the end of the game.
I think we are going
Um,
to go into
we
detail on that. I'm going to
we
disagree
can
with
no,
that.
I'm not going to talk too much about the politics of it, but I'm sure we will talk about what happened to
I
it.
have a lot of political takes on
Okay, great.
it.
Obviously, the end was, let's say, controversial
Yes.
when it came out. Just to give my feelings of it then before we go into spoiler territory, I thought, me and Alex have discussed this off pod, actually, haven't we, Alex?
Briefly, you haven't missed much,
Briefly.
listeners.
You haven't
We
missed
just
much.
briefly mentioned it. I want
That
to. We
I'm
consider
aware
our
that
opinions
Alex,
sacrosanct for your ears, so don't worry about that.
absolutely. I'm aware that Alex has got some hot takes, but my feeling was that the ending was pretty good. Perfectly fine, let's say. I think it certainly didn't elevate the material, but nor did it. I was sort of expecting, with all the controversy, that I was going to think, well, that retroactively undermines the game or ruined the game, or it was sort of completely shit. Let's start with some spoilers now,
Right.
just
Spoiler
so we can open
warning
up this.
is on here.
Spoiler warning.
You can check the show notes for the time code of when the spoilers end. I will put that in.
Thank you, Alex. The end of the game comes down to basically mainly three possibilities, or you can reject the choice entirely. So there's kind of four possibilities, but only three that are really given any attention. And that will be largely, you'll make the decision largely on how you balance saving lives with preserving bodily autonomy, maybe with like democracy, maybe like how pro-democracy you are. That's kind of basically whichever one of those principles you feel most comfortable violating, you've got to go ahead and violate it. And the game doesn't really, for once, tell you which one is the correct one. I thought that was perfectly functional. Alex, I would love to hear the hot take that I've been promised about the ending.
Okay. So, first of all, before we get into it, I should say, if you're unaware of the kind of history of what happened with this game, is that this game came out and this ending was extremely unpopular. People were up in arms about it, and it, in fact, caused a kind of proto Gamergate style backlash, which got extremely ugly. And, there were death threats and all this shit. And suffice to
Yeah.
say, even though I don't like the ending, that's all very much out of order and should not have happened. In fact, it got to the point where I think the first proper DLC that came out for the game, which was an extremely hastily put together new ending, really was the same ending, but it was kind of extended. And I think that's the one you'll have played, Ed. I played the original version, though I did go back and play when that DLC one came out, replayed and saw the new one as well.
Yeah.
I'll get into exactly what the differences are in a sec, but I think there is a very reasonable. There was a documentary. I saw some documentary. Maybe it was No Clip. I think the documentary about the making of Mass Effect, and they went into this, and there was a large bit about how like incredibly hard it was for the workers to like right at the point they expected to start like why finally the game's out, we can relax, or there's still DLC, but the thing like they suddenly had to be after no doubt great deal of crunch to just get the game out the door. They then had to immediately go back into crunch to hastily put together a new ending as demanded by their executives to deal with this backlash. And I think it's pretty reasonable to say that certainly the workers shouldn't have had to do that. And in general, one could say, even outside of that, more artistically, that like the audience demanding a new ending and then getting it is like a bad artistic precedent to set, And I'd probably agree with those. I would say though that the new ending was an improvement on the original ending.
Tell me about the original ending, Alex.
what happened in the original ending is you go down to Earth to finally fight the Reapers in the final battle. There's a bunch of battles on Earth. There is a whole section where you can talk to all your previous companions and stuff through either if they're with you or through holograms. So there is some closure for them there, but it isn't proper closure. It isn't real an ending to their stories. You go into the Crucible, the big machine you've been building. You didn't really know what the machine was, and it turns out when you get in there, you encounter what's called the Star Child, which is just like a child made of twinkly stars who is basically apparently made of some sort of space magic. And the child gives you the three options, which are, because the issue is that like the threat of AI is going to take over the galaxy, apparently. Option one is you personally, Shepard, becomes some sort of cosmic dictator god and can determine all the exact events precisely to their will.
The control ending.
Option two is you kill all AI.
The destroy ending.
And then option three is through space magic, all people, but aliens as well, and also AIs somehow become combo AI and organic. They become combo machine and person. And that's
hybrids.
And in that extended one, they also added the ability to just shoot the Star Child, which basically destroys the universe, and it's basically a joke ending. But in those three endings are the main ones. So in the original
control, destroy, and synthesis.
Yes. In the original version of the game, all three of those led to basically the same cutscene where you trigger the ending, you run to your spaceship, the Normandy, the spaceship goes into one of the portals that allow space travel. Some sort of wave follows them that's destroying the portals, but they're ahead of the wave. And then they kind of crash land on some planet, which appears to be some sort of tropical paradise. The end. And it is the same in all three endings, and that's all you get. And the only difference between them is that they are color coded. So each one of those endings has a different color associated with it, and each one of those cutscenes has like a different color highlight of that color in it. And that was literally the entire difference between the ending.
Wait, even in the control ending?
Even in the control ending, yeah.
Fuses.
It didn't really make much sense why any of that happened, how he becomes a god or whatever. Well, I think actually Shepard doesn't get on the ship. You see the others leaving the ship. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I played it. The DLC added ending is basically the same, but they basically just put in a bunch of bit more context. You get to see what happens to some of the characters, like these static shots, art pieces, like concept art of what bunch of the characters are up to after the game. You see that they start to fix the Mass Effect portals, because that was kind of a big thing. It's like the ending seems to imply that's the end of space travel in the Mass Effect universe. How the fuck are they going to deal with that? And they're like, oh, well, they just fixed them. Okay. And that's basically it. So I would say that having the extra context was good. It was an improvement, but I do not think it dealt with the fundamental issue. So the issues I have with it are, firstly, on a gameplay level, I feel this kind of betrayed what I felt like was the entire point of the Mass Effect game, which was that you would make these choices and they would echo through the games. You said this thing to this person in the first few hours of the first game, and then hundreds of hours later at the end of the third game, it's going to have ramifications, right? But then in this thing, regardless of all the choices you made, those three choices you have at the end are exactly the same, and they have exactly the same outcome. So none of the choices you made had any difference. And there's been plenty of games where you can make choices and you get a very granular ending where different things happen. It's not like that's new or impossible
like
to
Fallout.
achieve. Yeah, Fallout. That's a great example. There's hundreds of others though. And they just didn't do that in this game. And it just seems bizarre. I felt like that just completely betrayed the entire point of the whole series up to that point for me. But then politically, I also have quite big issues. So this is all based around the conflict between organics and AI. And that's shown in a kind of a microcosm of the Quarians and the Geth you were talking about. But this expands much
Yeah.
further to be literally all humans and aliens and all robots and AIs in the galaxy. And it basically presents it presents the conflict as inevitable. And then it only presents those three possibilities, which are, as you said, control, destroy, or synthesis. Now, I don't think it's a stretch to say that, at least a very broad and vague term, the idea, the whole thing between the AIs and the organics is like basically about multiculturalism. It's like two different cultures. How can they interact with each other? Can they live together? Can they coexist? Right? And certainly throughout the entire games, that had been, again, the Quarren and the Geth being the most obvious example, that had been repeatedly posited. And I, as a multiculturalist, always answered the multicultural answer. So I got the paragon good result in the third game between the Geth and the Quarians, which is actually quite hard to do. You have to have made the right choices all the way through all three games. Most people have ended up with one side annihilating the other. In fact, what's her face? The woman who's the Quarian?
Tally.
Pardon?
Tally.
Tally, yeah. I romanced her, so I feel bad for forgetting her name. she quite a likely outcome of that is that she kills herself because all her people were just destroyed. So I went through the whole game, all three games, as a multiculturalist, and it seems like that's probably what you did too, Ed. Well done for being having good politics. That was a final test. I was gonna throw you off the podcast if you hadn't done that.
Is that where Sofie went?
She
failed to do the correctly.
Unfortunately. So I did that. So I've been playing these games as a multiculturalist, and then the game finishes up and basically tells you to your face that the only solutions to multiculturalism as a conflict in society are: one, a dictatorship that forces everyone to comply; two, killing all of one side; or three, the most ridiculous, everyone somehow becomes mixed race. And then we'll solve racism. That's basically what it's saying, right?
No.
I mean, those are the three options.
I mean,
this is multiculturalism.
I think the synthesis one is where we disagree with the assessment. I think it's saying not that we need to become mixed race, but more that that will meld our cultures together.
I mean,
it's an inexact metaphor for that, I grant you. But I think it's very clear which of those three were meant to be the multiculturalist one. And we can say whether it is or is not a good stand-in for that. I mean, but clearly it's meant to operate as a stand-in for that. Literally, it does make
everyone magically becomes a mix of organic and AI. That is literally what happens. And
that is literally what happens. I would say that's obviously symbolically that's not what it's trying to say. I mean, I understand it's not exactly a Pulitzer Prize.
I mean, even if we don't say that's literally what they're saying, even how they go about it. So, like, okay, it's space magic making you a space dictator, but a space dictator or a dictatorship can be achieved without magic, right? That's possible. Killing everyone, all the AI, all the robots, killing everyone in an ethnicity, or at least getting close to it, is also possible. It's a thing that does not require, unfortunately, magic to achieve. It's happened. That third one is literally just like, oh man, we're just going to mix everyone together and they're going to be great. And that just is magic. So it's just like, it's basically giving up. The correct answer should have been literally, AIs and organics will just live together, as we've established is possible in the Geth and Quarian thing. And, we can, and, maybe after a very long time, there genuinely would be like a complete mix of cultures, and we wouldn't see where one would begin and one would end or something, perhaps. But like, to just be like, yeah, space magic means we're all friends now because essentially everyone's become mixed race. I mean, it's just...
I feel like their concern as writers was to not have a very straightforward, this is the good ending. I feel like that's definitely what they were concerned about. And I think that's why they didn't do the option that you're proposing, because I think that would very straightforwardly be the correct moral option if that was in the game. So I think that's why they went for a slightly weirder violation of people's bodily autonomy ending.
I guess. I mean, it's not really presented as a violation, I don't think. It's been a while since I played it, to be fair. I think it's just like, the problem with it is just it feels outlandish. Literally, suddenly, like, to be clear, while there is a certain amount of, like, there are psychic powers in this game and stuff, the idea of a level of space magic to literally change every living being and AI in the galaxy into a new thing is never it's even suggested or hinted at in these games, and then it just turns up
Mm.
at the end. So I think it had like at best a very simplistic and at worst a borderline offensive view on multiculturalism and like race relations, basically.
Okay. I think it's meant to stand in for something symbolically and is not the best representation of it symbolically, but I know what it's trying to say.
I mean, neither of the other two
Um,
are really symbolic. Yeah, they are again fairly
yes,
straightforward
yes.
things. You know, they may use space magic ways to achieve it, but they are things that can just happen in reality. Whereas this one is just like literally fucking magic, man. We're all the same now.
Yeah, agreed. But then that's because I think the more literal version of this would be just straightforwardly the good guy ending, and so they didn't want to include that.
I guess.
Which, it's, it's still fair to criticize them for that. But
Well, anyway, that is
um,
my hot take, and I don't think it's that hot
okay,
take. I think, frankly, thinking
no, I
that the
think
ending
that's
of Mass
kind of a
Effect 3 is
mainstream
good
take
is
on
the
the.
hotter take, to be honest.
I don't think it's good. I just don't think it's particularly bad. I think it's fine. I've heard a lot of the first part of your take
Yeah.
there, which is it meant that basically none of the decisions that you took in the game meant anything, and I didn't really feel that way. I feel like if you think that the stuff only has meaning if it comes up again literally right at the end of the game, that's a very strange approach to me. A lot of the stuff that got set up in previous games got resolved or whatever earlier in this game. I didn't need them to then come back and be double resolved at the climax. And frankly, my friends, if you think life only has meaning like right at the end, like you're in for a spompy ride because you're going to die and nothing's going to happen. Like, well, or maybe it will.
Well,
But you see what I mean? Things can be resolved before the very end, and things were resolved before the very
Yeah.
end. So I wasn't dissatisfied by them not also being double resolved
I guess.
right at the end.
But I mean,
That's my take.
in general, I remember one thing I heard said at the time was people saying, "Oh, what did you expect? Like an ending, like from an '80s movie, where there would just be freeze frames, and it would say at the bottom, like Shepard,
Graduated from
graduating
Duke
uni,
University.
whatever, all that, yeah, exactly that
Yeah.
kind of shit." And I'm like,
Yeah.
my position on that was like, well, I do think that the story requirements for the final part of what again could literally have been 300 hours of gameplay are quite different from a movie that might be an hour and a half long. You know, I do think, you spend so much time with the characters. And I will say, I'll remind you, when I played it, there was no Citadel DLC. I never got that closure. I didn't play I played the original ending where there was zero difference between the three, and there wasn't even the little bit of closure you get from the revised ending. So,
Yes.
yeah, I do
I
think
think
there are more requirements.
I think I basically agree that if it ended the way that you're describing, a more like a Fallout-esque way,
Mm.
that I would prefer that. But I think the question for me my expectation was it was going to be dreadful. Basically, I think it was fine, and it wasn't really, really good. Like your ending the way you're describing it, that could have ended up being really, really good.
Mm.
But instead, it was basically fine. It didn't undermine the game to me for the reasons I've outlined. It was basically just, here's an ending. It's okay. Move on with my life,
Sure.
rather than like what I was expecting, maybe, which was that me to react as if this was terrible.
Well, I would say I think
It was
probably
fine. It
part
was
of it
alright.
is just that you have heard for years about this famously
Definitely.
terrible ending, and you're primed for it to just be the worst thing you've ever seen.
I was super excited for it. I mean, I also watched Lost this year, which is another thing which is reputed to have a terrible ending, and it sort of
Well,
didn't.
I think Lost has a
had a
significantly
better ending.
ending than
Yeah, Lost does have a
Mass
better
Effect.
ending than Mass Effect. I agree. So I guess my feeling on the ending, I don't know. Maybe we can cut back to not spoilers now.
Sure.
My feeling on the ending, if you are trying to decide whether to play this game or not, is don't let the reputation of the ending stop you from playing these games. It doesn't retroactively ruin the rest of the game. I think it's perfectly fine, although not as, not the best of all possible endings and not a top tier ending by any stretch, but perfectly fine. Alex, give me your non-spoilery summary on the endings.
I would basically agree with that. I think the ending is somewhere between very bad and a lot worse than your opinion on it. But
Sure.
I do think it's still worth playing. I think I really liked the rest of Mass Effect 3. It's been way too long for me to give any more specific opinions than that. But I do remember I really enjoyed it until that ending. And my opinion at the time was, you know what, that ending, but it was still worth it. So I definitely would recommend the Mass Effect trilogy as a whole. And I don't think you should just quit out for it, and you should see the end to find out what all the fuss has been about for all these years. But
Yeah.
definitely do not get your hopes up for the ending, I'll say.
So those are my main takes on Mass Effect 3. We've done the characters and the structure and the story and some of the politics and the ending. I've just got a few quick fire things I wanted to throw in before we moved on to your game,
Go
Alex, if
for it.
that's okay.
Go for it.
One thing I want to touch on that we've sort of referred to quite a bit here is that the original release of this game is meant to be a lot worse in a lot of ways. And I wanted to acknowledge one of the ways in which it's meant to be worse is that the original release featured a multiplayer, which, as I understand, essentially had a loot boxy sort of pay to win element to it, where you could spend real money to get more of these sort of loot box vibes. Of maybe not technically a loot box, but this is kind of before loot boxes were really a big thing. But from what I could see online, that loot box adjacent thing. I don't know if you remember this, Alex.
I will say, I do vaguely remember. Yeah, I think there was some kind of proto loot box stuff in there, which raised eyebrows. But I also know there were a lot of fans of the multiplayer, and apparently it was like really fun to play because something you said you weren't that keen on the actual game, the combat gameplay, perhaps because you were so over leveled. But
Yeah.
I think it was really fun. It was a kind of it really got away from any kind of RPG pretensions by that point, which was maybe a pity. But as a pure little shooting game, I thought it was actually pretty good, and I think that was the opinion at the time. And I know there were a bunch of people who they played the multiplayer for quite a long time afterwards. I think they kept it connected for longer than you
To be
think.
clear, I thought the combat was fun. I
Mm.
thought it was pretty solid. It's just my complaint was more too many of the missions effectively boiled down to the really video gamey thing of you do a combat corridor, which
Yeah,
is always disappointing.
the separation between story and gameplay is very stark in the game. It's just like
Yes,
it's
very
just
stark.
like okay, and now
And
it's
now do a fight.
a sort of Call of Duty, and just get on with it, and then we'll get back to the story afterwards.
Yes. Yeah. As I understand in the original version of the game as well, to get more of I think they were called war assets. I can't remember if that was the original or if that was what it was called when I was playing it just now. But some of that was locked behind multiplayer. If you really wanted to like max out the war assets, you had to do multiplayer, which means you had to engage with the part of the game with the loot boxes and stuff.
I think
so. That
I
does sound a bit disappointing.
I think you could get those war assets in that, but also I think you could finish the game quite easily without doing
I
it
think
and getting pretty much. Maybe they were like really high level, to get the A rank in the war assets thing. You had to do it, but like the A rank was basically meaningless and did nothing. So, but
I definitely
those are
got
my
way
dim
more war
recollections. I'll
assets.
say I don't really remember that well.
I certainly got way more war assets than I needed to because I was quite concerned about not having enough to get one of the better endings. But it turns out you didn't actually need that
Exactly.
much to
All
get,
these
the best ending.
endings. It doesn't really make. Again, it doesn't make your war asset amount doesn't matter. You get the same 3 choices either way.
That's not quite true.
Maybe not in
I
maybe
don't
not
wanna-
in the
I don't want to
extended
unlock.
version.
Yeah, I don't want to unlock the spoilers again.
We're
There
on
is a
spoilers.
slight.
We're on spoilers. Sorry.
We're not spoiling
No
right now, but there's a slight variation.
Okay.
But it didn't affect my ending. Let's say that.
Yeah.
A couple of other things I just want to throw in quickly. It's going to sound petty, but the run animation was really silly. I can't really describe it too clearly other than they sort of really throw their elbows when they're running to a comical extent. And the game opens, like Alex said earlier, with a dramatic sequence where Earth is being attacked and Shepard manages to escape. And, in the sequence, he tragically sees a child killed by the invading force. It's kind of a poignant scene, and Shepard ends up being haunted by this child for the whole game, and it's a powerful representation of how he can't save all the innocents. It would be more powerful if you weren't through all that whole bit following Anderson, who's doing right in front of you this whole time this very stupid run with these sort of moves like from side to side, really sort of, and it just really took me out of it right at the start of this game. I thought it was so funny looking and completely undercut the poignant dramatic opening of Earth being attacked. That made me laugh. I mean, I say completely undercut. Obviously, I still thought it was cool, but that specific bit really I thought was silly. Other just really small points before we move on. There's a section in a Geth spaceship, and there were like computer key cards that you could get, and I was just there thinking like, would robot people need computer keycards? Surely they could interact with computers more directly. I don't know.
They haven't evolved
Silly
past USB 2,
yeah, floppy
unfortunately.
disks. Yeah, I felt like a lot of the game feels quite well designed. That little bit, maybe they could have put a little bit more thought into what a location run by computers would be like. And obviously, the demands of the game to have you be able to do a combat section in there means it feels a bit silly. Like this is what the inside of the computer place feels like. It doesn't. This is not at all what it would look like. I would say. And I also want to throw in there that I did experience of quite a few little glitches here and there throughout.
Oh, really?
One that happened quite frequent, just small visual things mainly. One that happened quite frequently was you can make Shepard wear a helmet, and then Shepard still has that helmet in the cutscenes if you put one on, but the cutscenes have been pre-rendered as though he's not wearing the helmet. So if anything happens with his general face area in the cutscenes, he just sort of clips straight through the helmet. The most standout point where this happened was the end of my romance storyline, where Shepard's like having a beautiful romantic kiss with his partner, and her face just comically clips through the helmet, and what's meant to be like the climax of this emotional moment. I also had a few what I think are audio glitches. I'm not sure, but there were basically moments where it felt like dramatic music should be playing, but there was nothing but the sound effects and the actors and just complete
Oh,
silence.
weird.
And in a way which wouldn't have made it could have been a deliberate choice, but I don't see any reason why it would have been. It didn't really fit with the moment. And then my least favorite glitch was I had 2 or 3 times where I completed an objective and the next event just didn't trigger.
Wow.
So I cleared a room and then I was just sort of standing there in the room thinking, is there something else I'm meant to be doing? And I ended up looking them all up, and each time, no,
Wow.
I just had to reload the checkpoint and do the fight again.
Would you play this on?
It's a bit PS5, but it was the PS4
yeah.
edition of the game. So that was a bit more annoying because it required redoing a few minutes of gameplay. Again, we're talking, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes of annoyance in a game of 25 hours. It didn't really affect how I feel about the game, but it does feel like they should have been ironed out by now, to be honest. And the very last thing I want to mention, there's a level where you run across a building that's built into the side of a cliff, and the cliff is slowly collapsing during the level as you run between the buildings. And I thought that was really cool. That's basically it. I thought it was really cool. Also, the deep bass blasty noise that they make when the Reapers show up is also pretty cool.
That's because I don't know if you did all the music. I think you did the theme or something was by Hans Zimmer. So so that's why they made that.
Yeah, that was really. I enjoyed that. I support that. So yeah, overall, Mass Effect 3 and indeed the Mass Effect trilogy. There are only 3. There are not anymore.
No, we've got to do the 4th one eventually.
Yeah, maybe. I thought the series was very solid, fun, fast-paced, big story, good characters, and some good ideas. The gameplay also pretty solid, although not super remarkable. The shooter stuff is fun, but it does sort of dominate the gameplay in a way which is perhaps a bit too dominant in the gameplay. A lot of the details are good. The character designs and the variety of alien designs, I think, is a real strength of the game. I really appreciate that. Politically, I would say it's got some sort of softly anti-war themes while kind of being pro and also anti-genocide, but while kind of being pro-soldier. It's also got some nice softish references to LGBT stuff, which is nice. But on the other side, it's got some very, very sexual presentation of women, which is a bit, as I say, 14-year-old coded. I would recommend playing the series if that sounds at all appealing. I'll give you my quick order of worst to best.
Right.
Worst, Mass Effect 1, then Mass Effect 3, and then Mass Effect 2 is the best. I feel like that's a relatively popular opinion.
That's fairly popular.
And yeah, it feels like a slightly better. It's like a B plus, I would say, as a series. It's like if you don't play them, I wouldn't say you're like hugely missing out. But I think if you will play them, you'll have a solid fun time. And there's enough cool stuff in there that like there are certainly memorable elements to it. Yeah, I don't know if you'd fundamentally disagree with that or not, Alex. I feel like we've probably got a similar overall esteem for the series, even if we do disagree with the Mass Effect 3 ending.
Oh yeah, I think I think it's kind of interesting if like they kept bringing out Mass Effect games that people liked. I think probably it would be held in higher esteem. I think people have just kind of forgotten a lot about Mass Effect. I think if you to say
Mhm.
that kind of middling assessment of it would have seemed really weird, I think, in 2012 or whatever it was that 3 came out, where it was considered like a really big deal, Mass Effect, but, EA has really squandered it over the years,
Yeah.
and apparently they're working on a new one, though God knows with this, Saudi Arabia thing if that will ever happen, but yeah.
Yeah. I I don't know. I mean, certainly Mass Effect 2 was very, very well received when that came
Yeah,
out,
yeah,
as we
yeah.
discussed, and that is a banger. But I mean, it's not like Fallout New Vegas level.
No,
Do you know what
no,
I
no,
mean?
no.
It's like solid, fun action RPG. It's a good time. I would recommend it, but it's not gonna like, rock your world. You're gonna have a good time. That's kind of yeah,
Yeah,
and that's all you really need. So yeah, Mass Effects. I've Mass Effected, and it's had a massive effects. I think it's time for us to turn to you, Alex. If you've not got
maybe it
anything else to
is.
say on
Maybe
the
it
series.
is. Maybe it is. Yes. I think there's probably a bit less to say about my one. Certainly less history, although it is historical. That's what we call a segue,
Ooh.
baby. It's Ghost of
Oh.
Yōtei for the PlayStation 5. That's right. The newest kind of
Ah.
big AAA Sony prestige game is out. Ghost of Yōtei. It is the sequel to Ghost of Tsushima, though there's one mission that kind of relates to things that happen in the Ghost of Tsushima. Other than that, it's a completely separate story. In fact, it's set hundreds of years later. You play as Atsu, who is a woman who, well, that mere fact has gained quite a lot of ire from usual suspects on the internet. But
From the people with the most interesting takes
yeah,
around.
oh, you won't believe how incredibly fascinating those takes are.
Women bad.
Yeah, could they be? Um, But no, you play as a woman in feudal Japan. She is, I guess she's not a samurai, but it is a samurai game. You've got samurai swords, depending on how specific about what being a samurai is, I suppose. But she is basically it's a big revenge story. At the beginning of the game, it's established that her parents and brother were killed by a man called Saito. He's not one of the Yōtei Six, all of whom participated in this killing. And Atsu herself was pinned to a tree with a samurai sword, and then the tree was set on fire and left for dead. But in fact, in ways they never really explain, to be honest, she survived. She just wriggled out from being impaled by a samurai sword against a burning tree and was fine, apparently.
'Tis but a flesh wound.
Yeah, she was all right. Don't worry about it. And like literally, you can see her. You very briefly see her naked when she gets into hot springs, though in the least titillating way they can manage. But you don't see like a big scar on her shoulder where she was impaled with a samurai sword. So I don't really know how they explain that. But anyway, she did survive, and then she was just a child, to be clear. And then she went off and honed herself to be an instrument of revenge. She fought in the Battle of Sekigahara, which was in 1600, which was basically the biggest ever samurai battle of feudal Japan. It's basically the one that is implied to happen at the end of the TV show Shogun, if you're a fan of that. Although in that it actually doesn't happen, but in reality the battle did happen and it was huge. That's a spoiler for Shogun. Sorry about that. uh, yeah. Anyway, so she became battle hardened, and now she has returned to her homeland of Etzo, which is nearby the mountain of Yōtei, Mount Yōtei, which is a real mountain, which is in what was then called Etzo, but is now Hokkaido, which is the big island in the north of Japan, and that's where the game's set. And it's basically a pretty clear revenge story. You have to hunt down the members of the Yōtei Six and wipe them off. Literally, Atsu has round her waist a belt, which is like this sash that has the names of all of the Yōtei Six written on them. And when she kills them, she dramatically holds up the belt and swipes over this one with her bloody katana. And this game, as I said, is a sequel, at least spiritually, sequel to Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima was sort of weird because it was famously incredibly historically inaccurate. Basically, it's like full of samurai and samurai swords and all the samurai paraphernalia that you'd expect of feudal Japan, but it was not actually set during feudal Japan. It was set hundreds of years earlier and way too early for all of that stuff.
Mm.
But
Is that why they did the time jump?
well, it was part of the reason. Essentially, actually, I'll briefly talk about what happens in Ghost of Tsushima because there is a weird kind of political element to it, which is it's set around like an incredibly fictionalized version of the real life event where the Mongol horde who are in China basically decided they wanted to invade Japan. So they sent a fleet to invade, and the fleet was basically completely destroyed at sea by a storm, but somewhat like similar to what happened with the Spanish Armada here. And in the game, it's posited that actually they landed on the real nearby island of Tsushima, and your character almost single-handedly fought them off and defeated the Mongol, and
Wow.
so saved Japan from invasion. Now, the thing is that this event where the storm destroyed them was referred to as the divine wind. And that in Japanese is divine, meaning God, kami, and wind is kaze. This is where the term kamikaze comes from, and this is why the suicide bombers are called that, because they were like the divine providence defending Japan from invasion, right? Or at least that's the idea. So essentially, this game was positing the idea that the kamikaze was in fact a person, and it's you. And they go through the whole thing, and they never say the word kamikaze once, for obvious reasons. But as I said, in that one small mission in Yōtei, you get his sword, which is the Storm Blade, and I guess that's that's a kind of a nod to the kamikaze concept. Anyway, this game, as said, 100 years later, so is at least vaguely historically accurate in that there are samurai and stuff around at this time. But what's kind of interesting about this game is that unlike that first game, which is very much going for like a kind of a there are samurai clans and there's debates between honor and practicality. The whole thing is whether you're basically going to be an honorable samurai or a dishonorable like shinobi and like be stealthy. It's quite staid in that way. This one is instead going for very hard vibe as the samurai movie as a Western movie, so they really are going for the Western vibe. Atsu also carries around a shamisen, which is a two-stringed kind of guitar style instrument that's like a real Japanese instrument, and you can play songs on it. And and it's also part of the soundtrack in general. And whenever the shamisen plays, they run it through these like crazy filters that basically makes it sound a lot like an electric guitar, which it gives it a real sound of like Enrico Morricone films. So they're going for that. There's a lot of like you're like the brusque stranger who walks into town and gets involved in things and has a conflicted moral code and stuff like this. So it's very kind of westerny. It's also it feels a lot more kind of gamey and a lot more less, while it's maybe more historically accurate, or it's not as wildly historically inaccurate, it is less realistic in that, like, for instance, part of the game is that there's lots of these rolling hills of the countryside, and they'll often have these streaks of white flowers on them, which look very pretty. But if you ride along the streaks, your horse goes faster, just like real life.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot more like the combat it feels a lot more gamey. And I know that's not a bad thing, but it seems that it's a lot more kind of a heightened thing. It's kind of got clearly with the revenge style, there's kind of a Kill Bill element to this as well. It's all this kind of thing. It's very kind of heightened. The stories are also a lot more straightforward since it's a revenge story. I'd also say it's a lot better. That old story, like, I could barely remember any of the characters. The main character was not terribly likable. It was fine, really, but it was also quite forgettable. The main character is a lot more interesting, and because it's a much more straightforward story, it's just a lot more entertaining. It's not to say it's a simple story, but it's just because it's just more kind of direct. It has been said that some people have criticized it, and I think it's pretty fair criticism. This is one of these Sony Prestige games, and for some reason, these Sony Prestige games have really fallen into how revenge is bad. Like, it is happens over and over again. Like, Last of Us Part 2 is all about how revenge is bad. And even more broadly, you could say that Last of Us Part 1 is how you should like it's less about revenge specifically, but more, you should get over the traumas of your past. You shouldn't let it turn you into a violent person, right? And like this is
Sure.
something that was also in the God of War games, the newer ones. I think the Spider-Man 2 game that came out has that as well. It's just for some reason they are really going back to this as well. And this is like the most directly it's about
Crash Bandicoot, of course.
famously,
It's all
famously.
about that.
This is like the most directly. It's about revenge. She has a list of people she's getting revenge against, but also maybe she shouldn't. Maybe this is damaging her inside. Maybe the other characters keep showing her there is better ways to live, and she shouldn't throw her life away on revenge, etc., etc.
Man.
None of it's particularly unique or that that interesting. Really, I mean, it's fine enough. It's a good little story with well portrayed characters, but nothing in it is hugely unique. There's been some talk about the actual structure of the game. Basically, there's a lot of side quests as you do. It's an open world game, to be clear. I don't know if I said that, but a lot of the side quests are quite small and inconsequential. I've heard
Mhm.
some criticisms of this. I'd say, personally, I think they have quite consciously gone for a kind of picaresque narrative kind of flow. Picaresques are quite
A what?
picaresque, Picar.
What does that mean?
It basically means it's like a lot of like small episodic things. It's like a character. Like it's quite good for a western or like this kind of western style samurai story where you're just like a lone wanderer out in the thing, and you encounter a weird little person, and you like have a little adventure with it. It's not very long, but that has like some little moral to it, and then you move on. And there's just a lot of those little
Mhm.
things. And I think it kind of gives a kind of nice vibe to the game, personally. It's something that's quite interesting about it is that this game definitely feels lower budget than usual
Hmm.
for these kind of big, it's still very much a AAA Sony prestige game. It's certainly not cheap to make. I want to be clear about that. But the most obvious way is whenever you have like low level interactions with people, i.e., not like a full lavish cutscene, and you're talking to them, it's just like one on one chat with someone. The animation is quite low. It's quite very basic. Two people very straightforwardly standing there. They don't really move. They have very basic
Mhm.
animation. As compared to something like Horizon Forbidden West, which had lavish animations. They were extremely high quality, and they were much higher quality than the first game for Zero Dawn, and that Zero Dawn has, I would say, much better animations than even Ghost of
Right.
Yōtei. So it definitely feels like it's like an attempt to make these games somewhat cheaper than usual, as well as the picaresque nature kind of feeding into it. The game is quite stark in many ways. There is actually a town that turns up right towards the end, but there's almost no like towns or cities in this game for the vast majority of it. There's a couple of towns. I think they max out at 5 buildings in it. That's it. That's the
Wow.
incredible metropolis.
Quite the
Yeah.
metropolis, yeah.
So this kind of yeah, but again, it feeds into this kind of Western frontier style thing that there's not like a huge amount of quote unquote civilization here. You know,
Mhm.
you're just on your horse out in the wilderness, and you might encounter a little hut, and there's a guy in there, and you talk to the guy, and he asks you to do something. I don't know, it kind of feels quite cozy. I quite like that element of it. I think
Okay.
everyone wants everything to be The Witcher 3, to have these gigantic, elaborate side quests that all pair into each other. And I'm not saying that wouldn't have been better, but I do like I think there's a charm to this kind of pared back version of it.
Yeah, you can't play every game and go, "Well, it's not as good as the best possible
Yeah.
game that it could possibly
Yeah.
be." Like,
Yeah.
you gotta enjoy the things that you play.
Well, I think there are, to be fair, a lot of people who are quite tired of open world games in general. And this is not an open
Yeah.
world game it doesn't break the mold of open world games. It's pretty standard open world game fare, you know.
Yeah, I think people have been a bit bored of the sort of
Yeah.
Ubisoft
It's not
style of
quite
open
that
world
bad,
game, aren't
but
they?
it's not a million miles off either. And actually, speaking of Ubisoft, it is worth pointing out that I played earlier this year Assassin's Creed Shadows, which is also set in
Mhm.
feudal Japan. And it's actually a kind of an interesting contrast because I think Assassin's Creed Shadows, which I would say is probably a game that is overall worse. Certainly the story is
Okay.
much worse in that game. I think it's clearly higher budget. The game's world in Shadows is far larger. It's fairly realistic. I mean, sort of realistic. I mean, all truncated, but it's got like Kyoto and Osaka in it, the real life cities. Obviously, in feudal Japan version of those cities, a bunch of little towns all over the place. Huge number. There's far more like content, as it were, in the game. But it's also quite kind of interesting. It's also it seems a lot more kind of technically accomplished. Like there's way more detail in the world and stuff like that. But I think it's got a lot less
I hadn't
charm.
thought of that.
Pardon.
I hadn't thought of the Assassin's Creed comparison. That is kind of strange, right? Two really quite big games that a lot of people are talking
Yeah,
about.
open world samurai games.
Like
Yeah,
open world that are set in the same basic style of game, set in the same place, and also basically in the same
yeah,
time. It looks the Assassin's Creed apparently is set in 1581, and this game is set in
yeah,
1603.
yeah,
22 years
yeah.
apart. That's
Yeah, I mean,
bizarre that that's happened.
the guys who fought in that battle I mentioned, Sekigahara, that she's in, the big samurai battle, they appear in in Assassin's Creed Shadows, for instance.
And both made by non-Japanese
Yeah, yeah.
developers as well.
Although, of course, this game is published by Sony, which is Japanese.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting. And then there was also Shogun, the Shogun TV series came out this year. So it's the year of the samurai, baby.
Hmm.
Who knows why that all that happens as it does, but it did. And it is an interesting thing because it is a lot more pared down. But I think it's a better game. It's a lot shorter, I'd say. I mean, to be fair, pretty clear Ubisoft would like to bring out endless DLC for Assassin's Creed Shadows to maybe actually finish the story, for instance, and other things like that. Whereas feels a lot more secure. There is actually going to be, they did this for Tsushima as well. I think it's called Ghost of Yōtei Legends or something like that. And basically, it's a multiplayer game. I think just set on the same map, and you do missions in 4-player co-op. I think, and I think they're like kind of like maybe more outlandish because it's like legend. Maybe they have magic in them or something. I never played the multiplayer version of this, and I'm not really sure how that works for this game. It's not out yet. I think it's out in the new year. But yeah, it's just it's like a fun kind of game that has like a nice style to it. It's got like these 3 modes in it, which annoyingly I realized just before we recorded I didn't actually try out, so I can't talk to them. I'm apologize for being a bad game reviewer, everyone. But this was in the original game,
Sake, Alex.
Kurosawa mode, where basically it's in black and white, and they put a kind of a film grainy thing on it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's a second one whose name, this is annoying. So yeah, there's these 3 modes. One is Kurosawa mode, meant to look like a Kurosawa movie, like the Seven Samurai. There's also a Takeshi Miike mode, who is like a kind of hyper-violent Japanese director. He did do some samurai films. I think that mainly just makes it look grittier and ups the blood. And then there's also Shinichiro Watanabe mode. Watanabe is the guy who made the anime director who made Cowboy Bebop. And more relevantly, he made Samurai Champloo. And as a result, basically, you go around in that game and it just plays a lo-fi hip-hop beats, which is a weird thing.
Nice.
But I can see it could work.
Well, are those 3 in addition to like a default?
Yeah. There's just a normal mode. This is a normal mode that hasn't got any of that. It's in color. It's normal. But those are just like you can play them alongside it. I know the first game, there was a lot of criticism of the Kurosawa mode because apparently they didn't get like the color levels right, the contrast levels right. And it didn't really look like a Kurosawa film. A lot of film nerds got up in arms about it. I don't know if they fixed that or not. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. So yeah, overall, I like it. It's a fun game that's got a lot of charm. It's really pretty. Is what I meant about the shadows being more technically accomplished is true, but this game is a lot more aesthetically accomplished. There's frequently these rolling hills of like these bright greens and other colors, and like there's a bit where you go into areas of snow and there's this, all this white, but then there's all these red leaf trees that contrast against it. It's a very pretty game at times.
Mm.
And yeah, as one of these Sony prestige games go, it kind of feels like it's one of the lower key ones, but it's a good time. And I guess I'd recommend it, especially if you like those things. It really doesn't break the mold on any of it. It's still got like the magnetic platforming when you climb up a mountain just by jumping between, you can't properly fall off, that kind of thing, just like Uncharted. Got all that, but overall, I enjoyed it. But a good time was had. Politically. So this game hasn't got very interesting politics. Probably the most interesting thing about it is the presence of the Ainu. The Ainu are a real life ethnic group in Japan, and an indigenous group to the north of Japan and especially Hokkaido. And it's worth pointing out that they have suffered a great deal over history. I mean, they have a history that is quite similar to the Native Americans. Basically, the Japanese, the kind of main ethnic group in Japan called the Yamato, they, through their holding control over Japanese establishment, did many waves of colonization into Hokkaido. And I mean, I don't really know enough about it to say, but it seems like I think you could make a pretty decent argument that they committed a genocide against the Ainu people. They got minimum, it's a cultural genocide. The Ainu language is now almost completely extinct. There are, I think, no native member speakers of it left. There is an attempt to revive it, but that's pretty bad. They had similar to Native Americans. They were forced into residential schools that were removed their culture and so on. There are very few even complete ethnic Ainu left, if any. I think almost everyone is essentially. There was a great deal of intermarriage. So they've had a bad way. But this seems like a pretty. I mean, I'm certainly no expert on the Ainu, sorry, as evidenced by the fact that I just mispronounced their name several times. But it seems to me like a good faith attempt to depict their culture. Pretty clearly, as I said, this is a kind of samurai as Western thing, and these people are very obviously as a kind of stand-in with the Native Americans in those sort of stories. You can trade with them. There is a whole section of the game where you spend a bunch of time at this Ainu village, and you do a bunch of missions with them, and you can find Ainu artifacts around the world. And there's also this sort of implication that they've been inappropriately taken from the Ainu and you're returning them to them. So that's probably part of it.
Mm-hmm.
This is before most of the really bad stuff happened to the Ainu. It is worth saying, though, that in the game, while the Saito clan, who are part of the Yōtei Six, who you are getting revenge against, they are samurai, the bad samurai. There's also the Matsumai samurai, who, to be fair, the game does not go to some pains to show are not good per se, but they are more on your side and are pretty much the good samurai who you want to defend and you ally with at various times. And I was saying that the Matsumai are a real samurai clan that existed and ruled over Kaido for many years. And I don't think they did the worst of the stuff to the Ainu, but they definitely did a bunch of bad shit to the Ainu. And they're just, and none of that is really mentioned in the idea that the Ainu would not have particular issue with the Matsumai is never mentioned. Just in general, they don't like, the people from the mainland coming over, they've had issues with them. That's as far as it goes. And maybe that's relatively historically accurate for the time, but I do think it's worth saying that probably they could have presented the Matsumai in a somewhat worse light. Though, again, I say this to someone who is zero expert on the matter. So I don't want to condemn them too much for that. But it is worth saying that. But it is nice to see this element of Japanese culture that has been, you don't see much in large part because it was heavily suppressed, depicted in this game in a what seems to be fairly respectful way. It's nice. That's pretty much it for politics, really. There is a certain element which is, as I mentioned, your enemies are the Saito samurai clan. But again, exactly what they're doing beyond killing your family is unclear. It's even suggested they had some sort of justification for killing your family. Like, it's bad to do that, but like, they did suffer a great deal because of your father, and samurai kill entire families sometimes. That's kind of just what samurai do. Probably the Matsumai do that as well. That's just what those fun guys got up to. So it's not really clear why the Saito are so bad. In fact, there's a whole kind of element of it that is not really explored, that they are recruiting people who aren't traditional samurai. Anyone can become a samurai with the Saito clan, as opposed to having to being born into it or something with the others, I guess. Again, I'm no samurai expert, And in fact, something that's quite noticeable is that a lot of their ranks are women. I don't know how realistic it is that that would be the case. Maybe that would be very uncommon, in which case this might be suggesting that they're taking in people, you know, dispossessed people from all sorts. They don't judge people. Anyone can come join the Saito clan. And so then the fact that the
Yeah.
Saito clan are the enemy and bad without ever really examining what their real reason, it's hard to give ideological causes to these kind of clans, samurai or in feudal families or whatever in Europe or whatever, because all they really wanted to do was just expand their own power and influence. And it was kind of thought that's just the way it is. And that wasn't even really considered to be that bad a thing, particularly in wider society. I think that's pretty much the same for samurai. So wanting to set up your own samurai clan and defeat the other samurai clans is kind of morally neutral in that kind of environment.
Mhm.
So there is no real ideology to that, but the suggestion that they are, open to everyone and everything, and then they're the bad guys. I don't know. It kind of rubs me up the wrong way, but it's so thinly portrayed. I mean, I think to even notice that this element is within them, you have to like read some of the few bits of text that are in the game, like the little documents you find and stuff. It's never a clear element of the story. It's just a weird thing, and you think, why would they make the seemingly more equitable samurai the bad guys? I don't know. Seems like it's maybe a bit of an issue, but again, I certainly wouldn't say this makes it a reactionary game by any stretch of the imagination. It's so thin, but yeah,
Did you say that the bad guys were they fictional?
I believe so. Yes, they're basically
Maybe is it
the
that? Does
matter.
that give them license to make it more diverse and have, I don't know, greater variety of people in it? Is that maybe that's what's
Yeah,
happened?
I mean, I think it's mainly just trying to explain why there would be a samurai clan in this area that you've never heard of, that disappeared from history,
Yeah.
I guess, is just like that. Oh, they were just like a kind of a ragtag mongrel samurai clan that kind of threw themselves
Mhm.
together or something like that. Again, this game could have really used going into the backstory a bit. I mean, exactly how Atsu, you know, again, I'm no expert, but I would imagine that for a woman at this time would be very rare that they would become, this samurai master and fight in battles. I'm sure it did happen, but quite rarely, I'd imagine. So probably some explanation of how that happened. There isn't any. It literally goes like, oh, her parents were killed and she was pinned to that tree. And then off screen, she escaped and then became a samurai master, fought in a battle, and now she's here. And that's basically the full amount we ever hear about that entire section of her life, which
Mm.
is a bit disappointing. I would have liked to have found out how she became like this. I mean, seems like she'd be the kind of person who would have like a lot of weird stories and things that have happened to her. But we don't hear
Mhm.
about it. So that's a bit disappointing. But yeah, I think that's pretty much I have to say about Ghost of Yōtei or Ghosts of Woktei.
Yeah.
I should
Get
I
'em.
should say there is a little bit more, which is just that. Yeah, we alluded to it earlier
Mm.
that a lot of the usual suspects on the internet did not like the fact that she was a woman at all, and kind of she's not like a sexy lady. The character and the actress she's based on is a very attractive actress. I don't want to say that, but like she's not dressed in a very feminine way. She does wear women's clothes generally, but she's not a sexy, buxom lady or whatever these weirdos on the internet would want. And
Mhm.
also the woman who played her is called, here we are. The woman who played her is called Erika Ishii. She's American, but I think as far as I can tell by the cast list, I think it seems like they did a very good job matching pretty much everyone in that cast list, including the minor roles, have East Asian names. So I think they did quite a good job getting East Asian actors to play all those parts. And certainly no exception with Erika Ishii, but she's queer. She said she goes by any pronouns. She's donated to LGBTQ charities and opposed transphobia and done all that publicly and said you might imagine, she's not a huge fan of Donald Trump. So it says some not terribly positive things about him either. And this caused a large amount of upset about her.
Consternation.
Yeah, which I mean, it feels just redundant to talk about how ridiculous that is, but I feel like I should say it happened and it was ridiculous. Obviously, full solidarity to Erica in dealing with all that shit. And I should say, it seems that this game has sold well, if not better than Ghost of Tsushima, which starred a man. So, so
Like God
I
intended.
guess don't go woke, go broke. It seems to be go woke or go broke, I should say. It seems a bit so that's nice, I guess. Although we really shouldn't be putting all our political hopes on a video game selling well.
No.
It doesn't really mean that much, really. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. But yeah, Ghost of Yōtei, a fun game. I enjoyed it. Kind of feels a bit low key, but yeah, it's good at what it does. And yeah, if you enjoy those Sony Prestige games, I think you'll enjoy this. Fans of the genre,
Cool. Thank you, Alex.
you're welcome.
That was a lot of Japanese history we got there as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
I can't pretend to have known almost any of the
Yeah.
things that you said, but I have heard of Japan.
You know, I really wore out the Ainu Wikipedia page there. Got all the juicy morsels out of it. So that was Ghost of Yōtei. And now we move on across those rolling hills with flowers that make your horse go faster. Now we move on to the news, the other side of the hill. And first
Wow.
up, yes, poetry. I've been inspired.
What imagery?
I've been inspired by the beautiful visuals of Ghost of Yōtei.
That was really lovely, Alex. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Well, first up, we've got a story from Ed, which is some lovely games workers updates.
Yeah, so mine's not so much one story as it's a sort of a bit of a wrap up of a few different stories from the past few weeks. But as Alex says, it's all around sort of games workers, game developers working in the industry. Give you some updates. So let's start. First, the workers build a Rocket Boy. The developers behind the disastrous Mind's Eye that came out earlier this year have put out an open letter describing long-standing disrespect and mistreatment, that's a quote, at the hands of the studio's execs. This letter is signed by 93 current and former workers, along with the IWGB, the Independent Workers of Great Britain. Their game workers branch specifically have signed it. The letter details the disastrous handling of redundancies, with over 250 people having been made redundant so far since the launch of Mind's Eye. They describe how the execs failed to listen to the workers in the run-up to the launch of Mind's Eye, how they required huge amounts of mandatory overtime, which they could take back as toil, time off in lieu. They could take the time back later, basically, but they could only take back 7 hours for every 8 hours they overworked. Yeah. And they have also, the studio execs have apparently been deliberately unclear in their communications around the redundancies. I'm going to quote directly now. Our experience at the company has been one of burnout, job insecurity, health issues, and the failure of a game that many of us have put years into. Barb, Build a Rocket Boy, needs to change. CEOs need to take a backseat and allow the skilled people who remain at the company to forge the path ahead. And the letter has 4 demands. Number 1, a public apology for this mistreatment of employees and proper compensation for laid off employees. Number 2, the option for remaining employees on redundancy notice to either work their notice period or to take payment in lieu of notice. Number 3, a concerted, meaningful and documented effort to improve conditions and processes within the company, including the acknowledgement of the IWGB as the trade union there. And finally, a commitment to the use of official external partners to action any future redundancies, preventing unfair treatment. So this is obviously another classic example of, we've seen so many of them since 2022 especially, of the games industry treating their workers like shit, and it's once again backfired ultimately with this release of the half-baked product that very much damaged the company's reputation. These 4 demands from the letters seem incredibly reasonable. Like, it's hard to imagine anyone seriously arguing against these 4. I mean, an apology, like, that's such a minimal thing, and it would be ridiculous for them to not manage to give these 4 things. But let's see what happens, shall we?
Well, famously, one of those execs is Leslie Benzies, who it seems like has a colossal ego. And I mean, I don't know him, but from what little I've seen of him, does not seem like the kind of guy who would give that kind of apology. Though obviously he absolutely
not the
should.
apologizing type. Yeah. All the use of external partners to action future redundancies does not seem like a huge ask. So yeah, that's that little nugget of story. Obviously, solidarity with the workers there. The second story that I'm going to touch on is the United Video Game Workers and the Communication Workers of America have put out a joint statement and petition regarding the buyout of EA for $55 billion from a group of private investors, including, most famously, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, and also including Affinity Partners, the company of Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The statement that the unions have jointly put out, it points out that the tens of thousands of workers who make EA a company that is able to profit $1 billion per year were not consulted at all on this buyout. The deal, which includes EA having to finance $20 billion in debt, is quite likely to lead to layoffs and at least various corners being cut. And it's going to be the workers that are going to be most impacted by this deal, no doubt. It is therefore, this is, I guess, me editorializing to some extent, but it's clearly the implication of the letter. It's ridiculous that they have been completely ignored. The letter, now to quote the letter, calls on regulators and elected officials to scrutinize this deal and ensure that any path forward protects jobs, preserves creative freedom, and keeps decision-making accountable to the workers who make EA successful. Is that likely to happen? Are the regulators likely to scrutinize this deal? Well, to quote the Financial Times, or a source quoted in the Financial Times at least, what regulator is going to say no to the president's son-in-law? It's not the best situation to be in, especially since the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund has not got the best track record. In an interview with Eurogamer speaking about this, Human Rights Watch said, quote, "We have found that the Public Investment Fund has contributed to and is responsible for human rights abuses. We see this as a deliberate attempt to distract from the country's human rights abuses."
Yeah.
So there seems, I think a lot of people familiar with the situation would agree with that assessment. It's not great. Given the likelihood of this being ignored by regulators and given those human rights criticisms, effectively, I guess we could call it game washing. I don't know if that's a phrase that's in use, but I think we can all see what it means. The letter and the petition could play a vital role in keeping up this pressure. I think the EA story has cut through more than most video game stories just because of the scale of it and because of the weirdness of Jared Kushner being so involved in it and the public investment fund being involved in it. But it's this kind of stuff that keeps it on people's minds. And even if they aren't successful in stopping this takeover, I think the more we can all see and understand how this industry works at the highest levels, and indeed how industries in general work at the highest level, the more clearly we can see the world that we're actually operating in, and the more effectively we can come together and take action. So I hope that their demands are met, but even if they are not, I think it's important that these two unions have come together and made this very public statement. I think it shows where we're at. That's the second story. My third story is better news. It's that another branch of Activision Blizzard voted to unionize this month. Exactly. Over 400 staff from their platform and technology department, which includes things like QA testers and localization. They've joined the nearly 3,000 Activision Blizzard staff who are already unionized, and they've joined the Communication Workers of America, who you may remember from the previous story. A member of the organizing team have said, quote, "Having more unions increases workplace standards across the board, and I think I can speak for us all at the Red Barrels, even Sofie, when I say we all agree with that assessment." That said,
I think we
Activision Blizzard
say that for certain.
Activision Blizzard are owned by Microsoft, so I would want to remind you that they are still considered a consumer priority target for boycott by BDS, so I would nonetheless urge you to boycott them. The final story I'm going to touch on is about game devs, and it will be a familiar one in many ways. The Xbox game dev kits have just had a huge price increase from $1,500 to $2,000. Now, it's really shocking to imagine Xbox increasing prices and things, isn't it? But Xbox partially made their name in the industry by being easier to develop for compared to its competitors. So increasing the barrier to development by increasing the price of the dev kits feels sort of worse somehow than even the rest of their stuff. Like the ease of the development is kind of what made them to some extent, not not totally, but certainly to some extent. And it feels a bit shit that they're going to turn around and do this. As I've alluded to, this comes in the context of them increasing the price of the actual Xbox this month, or the Xboxes, as well as the cost of Game Pass massively increasing recently. In fact, reporting come out in the last week showing that Microsoft executives are expecting Xbox to make a 30% profit.
Crazy.
And they've had that expectation since at least 2023. This is nearly double the industry standard and goes some way to explaining the intense price raising we've seen since then. It also sounds like they're geared up to do this even more in the future. Xbox CEO Sarah Bond said in an interview recently that the next Xbox hardware is going to be, quote, very premium, very high-end curated experience. And that basically means it's going to be very expensive.
Yeah.
Traditionally, consoles are sold at a loss so that then they can make a profit by selling you the games afterwards. But it seems Xbox no longer really thinks of themselves as hardware manufacturers. And it seems like their strategy is probably going to be sell hardware for a profit and also sell games anywhere that would accept them, as has been happening, as we've really seen this year more than any other year. With the price increases in hardware, the price increases in software, in Game Pass, and now even in price increase to develop for Xbox, all while Microsoft are, to quote the BDS website, perhaps the most complicit tech company in Israel's illegal apartheid regime and ongoing genocide. Microsoft really are making Xbox easier to boycott with every single passing day.
It's true. I mean, as well as all that, it was announced they showed off the next Halo game, which is going to be a remake of Halo 1, which not only have they already remade, like they already made a full graphical overhaul of it about 10 years ago, I guess, in the anniversary edition. So there's already an updated version of it that they're now redoing again, although there are more gameplay changes this time. But it's also going to come out for the PlayStation 5 at launch.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. And I think most people are just
there's something disturbing about that, isn't there?
As basically the death knell to Xbox. I mean, if their number one franchise is going to be available at launch on a different console, I mean, it's basically over. I think this console they're putting out, if it ever does come out, who knows? But if it is basically just going to be, it's pretty much just going to be a PC. It's quite likely, people are speculating it's going to literally just run Windows.
Wow.
Because the Xbox ROG Ally handheld thing they put out recently, that has Windows on it. In fact, it comes pre-installed with Microsoft Teams, which is what everyone wanted.
Wow.
Everyone loves
Teams
Microsoft Teams, and everyone wanted that in their gaming handheld, right? Like, genuinely, I've seen guys like go, how to uninstall all this shit you do not need and like just use the resources on the machine, right? And it seems like probably the quote unquote new console will just be a PC running Windows, and like there's even the speculation that it will literally be able to run PS5 games that are coming out for PC now on it. So and therefore it probably won't even be subsidized in the way you were talking about. It will just be, a PC with a fucking Xbox logo on it.
Yeah.
So it's likely to be extremely expensive.
Yeah, I mean the Xbox ROG Ally thing that they've already released is pretty expensive already for what it is. I mean,
the top end one is literally $1,000. Yeah, we talked about that in the last episode, I think, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it would be very hard to feel positive about these decisions that Xbox have made, and I don't see anyone online with any kind of feeling of positivity towards this. And I don't know. Is this the plan? Like, are they happy with this negativity? Like, or is this all built in to their strategy?
Who knows?
Or is this a massive blunder by them? Or is this what they expected from the start? Is this just a way of getting out of the hardware game?
Like, I think it's literally that. I think they want to. I think they don't want to lose the reputational loss of being a hardware company, so they don't want to, like Sega did back in the day, say, "That's it, we're just game publishers now." And so they're doing it in like absolute increments. And I mean, they could probably just sell that new Xbox, even if it's very expensive. They don't make that many and they sell at pure profit. And yeah, it's a bit of money. And probably if you buy one of those, you probably want to buy the Xbox games as well, sure. Microsoft published
Yeah.
games, That's probably just it. And, that's on top of making some very questionable decisions on what games they make. And on top of that, BDS.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and in the interviews, they've been talking about exclusives as though they're some sort of relic of the past, as though the Switch 2, which is heavily
yeah,
based on exclusives, hasn't come out this year and done
yeah.
incredibly well. Like, it's very strange. They're almost they're almost out of touch with reality, it feels like. It feels like they're trying to make a new reality by saying things like
Mm,
that, and it's not quite working. That's not quite how reality works. Or the PlayStation 5 is partially part of its success is based on, their own private
mhm.
franchises, like the Spider-Man ones, for example. Like, it feels a bit ludicrous to suggest that
It's
exclusives are a thing of the
the
past.
the issue is that their exclusive games have not been very good for a long time. I guess they've improved somewhat recently because they just bought up a bunch of companies. But even then, they're increasingly not that exclusive. But like if they just like a
Mm.
Nintendo shows it still works. You just put out a machine and then put out a bunch of really good games that you can only play on that machine. It's likely to do well. And it just feels like even Sony has kind of just forgotten this basic concept. And if they erode the exclusivity stuff, then more and more, then people just think, well, there's no point in getting this here, so I'll just play it on the PC.
Just get a
Exactly,
Steam
get a
Deck.
Steam Deck or whatever. It's just, I don't know.
Mm.
It seems weird to me, especially when Nintendo is showing, oh, it still works. You just have to do it. Anyway, I think going on a big old rant about that, I could do, but I think it would make this already quite long podcast even longer.
Yeah, let's head over to
So
your
let's,
story now. That's my summary of various events that have happened to game workers over the last few
and I
weeks.
and the listeners thank you for it, Ed. Well done.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
my story, it's a bit of a downer. It's some sad news. It's the death of a game developer. Tomonobu, Tomonobu, now that realize, I don't think I've ever said this out loud. Tomonobu Itagaki is his name. Itagaki is how he's more generally just called. Yeah, unfortunately, he was a game designer and developer in Japan, and he has died at the untimely age of 58. Exactly what he died of is unclear. There is something of a tradition in Japan that they do not announce the death until quite a long time until after it's happened. Like the funeral and so on probably would have been quite a while ago, I imagine. And there are no details on how he died, but it seems like he was probably ill and knew about it because he gave a final statement to be published after his death. And the statement goes as follows: final words. The flame of my life is about to go out. The fact that this message has been posted means that my time has finally come. I am no longer in this world. I have entrusted someone important to me with this final message. My life was a continuous battle which I kept winning. I cause a lot of trouble for others too. I take pride in having fought to the end and having followed my convictions. I have no regrets, but I am deeply sorry that I could not deliver new works to my fans. I'm sorry, so it goes. Itagaki Tomonobu. So that my life was a continuous battle which I kept winning line kind of is an aspect of the kind of persona that he put out. So people who don't know Itagaki, he is the founder of Team Ninja within Koei Tecmo. And in doing that, he developed the Dead or Alive fighting games and also the kind of 3D revival of Ninja Gaiden, specifically Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2, and I think 3. I'm not sure about 3, but not 4, which literally coincidentally came out, I think, this week, to I think generally positive reviews. He actually left Koei Tecmo in 2010 after having a quite acrimonious split from Tecmo. He sued them for claiming they were withholding bonuses for Dead or Alive 4, but he did reach some sort of settlement with them eventually. After making those games, he founded Valhalla Games, a new company which made a game called The Devil's Third for the Wii U. This game had a famously tumultuous development. Originally, it was going to be an Xbox 360 game. Eventually, it came to the Wii U and was famously terrible. One of the worst games. People on the list of like worst games ever made sometimes. I don't know if it's that bad, but it is apparently very bad. And after that closed, Valhalla closed, he found a new company called Itagaki Games in 2021, which was apparently working on a game, but it seems like unlikely they will now that their founder has died. So that kind of continuous battle which I kept winning is because while he apparently, by all accounts, was quite a kind of typically nerdy guy for a game developer, especially of his age, back in the day, it seems that so the Ninja Gaiden games were like a big get for, speaking of Xbox, but this is the original Xbox, and they made a big effort to try and get some Japanese made exclusives, and this ended up being one of them. And it was a really loved game, really kind of one of the first of the big kind of super difficult games, the
Mm.
trend that would then be taken up by Dark Souls and so on. But Ninja Gaiden is famously very difficult. And at the time, he kind of developed a public persona as a kind of a mysterious badass. He would always, like always, wear a leather jacket and sunglasses indoors, always in every interview. He was dismissive to the point of almost insulting. Or in fact, I think he was just outright insulting in interviews. I think when they made a kind of a remaster of Ninja Gaiden, called Ninja Gaiden Black, they put in a new mode, an easy mode, which I think was literally called dog mode, to literally call the people who played the easy mode dogs. um, he also kind of had it seems quite likely this was all a persona that he put on as a kind of a wrestling style persona. And
Mhm.
he kind of formulated a feud with Katsuhiro Harada, who's the head of the Tekken games. So obviously he made his own 3D fighting game, as well as in opposition to Tekken. And he basically would frequently slag off Tekken in the press. I saw at one point he was asked by a game website to like list his top 5 favorite and least favorite games, like the top 5 best and worst games. And the top 5 best games were, fairly typical favorite games. There were Ocarina of Time was on there, I remember. But the top 5 worst games were 1, Tekken 1, 2, Tekken 2, 3, Tekken 3, 4, Tekken 4, and 5, Tekken 5. And
Mm.
I think a lot of people thought this was like
Subtle.
a real animosity, but it came out a few years ago that actually it was fake and they were friends. And in fact, very touchingly, Harada put out a message in English actually on his Twitter that said, "It's hard to believe, but Itagaki-san, my senior from university and my rival as a creator, has passed away. The last message I ever received from him was, 'Let's go drinking. Let's make some noise soon.' To think that he's gone at just 58 years old. Yes, everyone dies eventually. That's inevitable. But isn't it a bit too soon? Didn't you say you were going to defeat me someday? Didn't you come to my wedding wearing your usual black leather jacket and sunglasses and call me your comrade in arms? Didn't you tell me to come to you whenever I was in trouble? I never even got the chance to consult you about anything. Honestly, I'm really depressed." Just, I don't know, quite a touching little message, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
that is quite sweet. That implies quite a strong
yeah,
relationship,
yeah,
really,
I think
doesn't it? The wedding invite,
came to the wedding
especially.
even. So,
Yeah.
he also did a very long, far too long to recap on here, message that kind of recaps their kind of relationship through the years in more detail. But yeah, it's just really sad that this guy died. I think he's one of like the first kind of well-known game developers to have died, really. Kind of
Mm.
like quote unquote rock star game designers types, which he certainly styled himself as at minimum. There was a guy called Kenji Eno, another Japanese guy but he was really kind of a cult figure. He had a few games on the original Saturn and on the Dreamcast, maybe a couple after that, but then he died quite sadly, but wasn't as famous as Itagaki. So this isn't quite as like if Kojima or, I don't know, Peter Molyneux or Miyazaki does Dark Souls games, or, one of these like famous game designer types dies. He's not quite up there, but it's one of the first of those that I've to have died. And I suppose people are getting older, it's inevitable, it's going to start happening. I mean, Miyamoto is going to die eventually, right? He's also already basically retired. He's pretty much 70. So, yeah, a sad story. I should say, a bit of a downer on this already downer story. He was accused of sexual harassment at one point in 2006. So one of his former co-workers sued him for sexual harassment, though he denied it, and he was found innocent by the courts in 2007. So I'll say that. but he certainly was.
Well, found not guilty,
Pardon?
presumably. Found
Yeah, he was
not
found
guilty.
innocent, not guilty. Yeah, I mean, he was. The website always said he was deemed innocent. I'm not sure exactly what that means in Japanese law, but that's what it said. Yeah. So, I mean, certainly a well-known and notable character, and it's certainly sad that he died at such a young age. Yeah. So, unfortunately, we have no Sofie, so we will not have another news story. So that really is going to be it on that downer. It's a downer ending. I think sometimes it's good to have a downer ending.
Yeah. Not all endings can be as good as Mass Effect
It's true,
3.
very true. Very true. Very true. Very much this is the Mass Effect 3 of podcast endings, I think. Which one of these three choices will you make? Well, unfortunately, they're all the same and they end up with the podcast ending. So we're going to get on to all the credits and stuff. A reminder, we would again, as always, love you to share us on social media and review us on iTunes and Spotify. You can find us on social media on Twitter at RedBarrelsPod and on Blue Sky at redbarrelspodcast.bsky.social. Me personally, you can find me at AlexDean, ALEXDUIN on Twitter, and the same thing, .bsky.social on Blue Sky. Ed, what about you? How can people find you?
Well, you can find me on Blue Sky at Not a Lemon and on X at Still Not a Lemon. And you can find absent comrade Sofie. She streams on Twitch at So Freely, so check her out on there. That's probably the best way to keep in contact with any of us, really.
She has been off recently because she's been ill.
There's very illness,
It's real, the illness. She hasn't just lied to you, the listeners. She's really ill. Sorry, I don't want to say she's really ill. She's ill, as far as I know.
She really is ill, an appropriate amount to be off, but not so ill that you should be concerned.
Yes, I believe it's the flu or a sore throat or something. I don't want to speak for Sofie. She can defend herself when she's back, which hopefully will be next time. We're all very sad she's not here. As always, the music that you have listened to and enjoyed and imbibed,
savoured
indeed, is from Brilliant Drink. Check them out on Bandcamp and review us and all that. But I think that's it. I think that's really going to be it. I'm going to say goodbye. Ed, there's only going to be one person saying bye, but please give it your best. Give us your bye.
No. I'll do my respectful goodbye.
Okay,
like last time.
Yeah. So we can't do it. We can't do it.
It's a me and Sofie thing. I can't do the bye.
Okay, well I say goodbye, and Edward, you say
goodbye.